I was sitting at the bar of my favorite watering hole one Friday after a long, long work week. It had become my habit to stop in here after work on Friday, before heading home since the beer was cold and the food always excellent. And it wasn't that there was anything pressing awaiting me at home. By the way, that's by my choice. My favorite server in the whole world, Gail, was standing at the bar chatting with me about nothing in particular when she mentioned that a young couple had come in that she hadn't seen before. Since the other server was occupied with another table, Gail walked over to where the young couple stood, appearing unsure of where to sit. She greeted them, and a brief discussion ensued that ended with Gail pointing directly at me. The young couple came over. As they walked toward me, I could see that they must be brother and sister, and maybe even twins. They looked vaguely familiar for some reason, but I knew I'd never seen them before. "We're sorry to intrude, sir, but is your name Ames?" the young woman asked. "Yes, it is." "Why?" I replied. I had no clue who these people were or what they could possibly want with me. I wasn't being unfriendly, but not totally welcoming either. "Mr. John Charles Ames, you go by Jack or sometimes JC?" she continued her questioning. "Yes. Now, since you seem to know who I am, would you tell me who I'm talking with?" I hadn't been called JC for ages. "We think you're our father. We're Jessica and James," she said, hesitantly and somewhat hopefully, as if their names explained everything. They didn't. "I'm sorry. I don't know who you think I am, but I've never had any kids in my life." "You must be mistaken," I answered her. This was a fact. I'd been divorced for over 20 years, and I knew that my ex and I didn't have children. If she had kids, it wasn't by me, and I hadn't been in any relationship since that would have resulted in 2 kids the age of this couple. "Please excuse me. I have to go," I said to the young couple, then to the server. "Gail, can you put this on my tab, please? I'll see you next Friday as usual." I got up and left the pub. The young couple didn't say anything, just watched me walk out. I drove home to my cabin attached to a campground I owned part of. The cabin could be accessed with permission via the campground or by knowing where to turn off the access road. Well, it wasn't really a cabin, I just called it that. It was a 2-story log house with 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, living room, den and kitchen/dining room. It was far more room than I needed. It came with a campground, and my partners didn't want to live in it. They owned a large, spacious house about a kilometer away. They needed the room because of their 5 kids. The visit of the 2 young people stirred up long-buried memories. Memories I had hoped were buried forever. I am a computer security consultant and also an instructor at a small community college near Halifax, Nova Scotia. I've been with the college about 15 years now and also consult with small and medium-sized businesses as a sideline. Though my partner and his wife and I are equal owners of the campground, we have little to do with the day-to-day operation of it. We have a very capable manager who runs it for us. We might help out when it's really busy, but usually we just stay out of the way. 23 years ago, I was just a young guy out of university with a brand new degree in computer science. My ex-wife, Bev, had graduated with a nursing degree, and we were married shortly after graduating. Our life was great. We were young and in love and had the world by the ass. A couple of years after getting married, we bit the bullet and purchased a small house in the West End of Vancouver, British Columbia. It wasn't too far from St. Paul's Hospital, where Bev was in or nurse. The commute to my job took all of 10 minutes by bus in inclement weather, or about 30-minute walk. My work was new and interesting since it was the early days of the internet. In-depth and complicated security needs had yet to rear their ugly head at the time, and we were all busy developing new programs and services. It was an exciting time to work in the industry. Our company was expanding almost daily, and I was quickly rising through the ranks by virtue of seniority, if nothing else. However, I did know my job and found myself being asked more and more often to train new hires on our programs and systems. Though I'd never had any formal training as a teacher or instructor, I found I enjoyed that part of it. The only blot on our total happiness was the passing of our parents within months of each other. Mine were killed in a multi-car accident on an interior highway. I was devastated, naturally, since I had no other immediate family. Bev's mother had come down with an aggressive form of breast cancer and mercifully died quite quickly without too much suffering. We always thought that her father died from a broken heart. He was devastated by the loss of his wife of 30-plus years and was never the same after she passed. He left us about 6 months after she did. Bev was an only child. The only benefit out of the whole mess was we were able to be debt-free except for a small mortgage remaining on the house. Truth be told, we'd rather have had the debt than lose our parents. I had a bear of a week. My team called me in Sunday to troubleshoot a problem, and then all week I was working from early morning until around 10 o'clock at night. I hardly saw Bev during that time, at least awake. I was just too tired and she was usually in bed by the time I got home. In the morning I was gone before she was awake. I'd get home, eat something or other and go to bed, get up early and the whole thing would start again. So it was on that fateful Friday. We'd been married about 3 years when that world and everything I valued came to an end. I came home from work late Friday evening, as I had all week, to find that Bev had moved out. Everything, and I mean everything, that could have been considered hers was gone, including our car. Well, actually it was hers. I was never on title, and she owned it before we were married. To say I was frantic would be like saying the sun is hot. It was obvious that she'd been planning this. I never saw any hint of it coming. The hospital would only tell me she had taken a leave of absence, and they didn't know where she was. They wouldn't say when she'd be back. I searched all our favorite dining and watering holes and called everyone we ever had any kind of relationship with. I waited the requisite 48 hours before filing a missing person report with the police. They didn't sound hopeful. I reluctantly went back to work the following Monday. Even my PA, Patricia, or Pat could see that I was just going through the motions. It was hell, not knowing where the love of my life was or why she had left. We had hardly ever had an argument in all the years we had known each other, and never a fight. It was a mystery that I wouldn't solve for many years. I determined, in my own mind, over the ensuing weeks that she had found someone else. I was heartbroken, but if it made Bev happy, then I'd try to forget her and move on. My lawyer called me about 2 weeks later and told me he had some documents I had to sign. I had no idea what was coming when I walked into his office and was presented with divorce papers citing irreconcilable differences. On her lawyer's instructions, Bev's location could and would not be revealed. Defeated, I signed before leaving my lawyer's office. He'd explained the various options open to me. I didn't like any of them. I did, however, get him to include a note asking her lawyer to pass on asking why she had left me. I never heard back, and a few months later, I was single again. After a couple of months living in a fog, I sold the house. After paying off the mortgage, there was a good amount of money left. I put half of the proceeds in an account in Bev's name and informed my lawyer, who of course knew who Bev's lawyer was, that I had done so. She could access the money anytime she wanted. I still loved her, though I was devastated by what she had done. I didn't know for certain that she had someone new in her life, but if she did, it was better that I was out of it. After selling the house, I resigned from my job with a vague plan of traveling for a while before settling down. Was I running away? You're damned right I was. Hopefully into a new life without memories. It was a tearful goodbye with my loyal PA, Pat. She and her husband were the only islands of sanity in my world. I told her, truthfully, that I didn't know where I was going. I made vague promises to let her know if I ever settled down. I piled everything I owned into my Ford F-250, purchased with part of the proceeds from the sale of the house, and departed Vancouver forever. I haven't been back since. I virtually worked my way across Canada over the next 2 years. If I found a place I liked, I'd find some inexpensive accommodation and then find some work in the computer industry. Usually it was retail sales and repairs. My credentials were never questioned. I had my certificates with me, probably the most valuable items I owned. I'd work for a few weeks or months, then move on. Eventually, I ended up in Nova Scotia. After exploring the province, which is actually not all that large when you get down to it, I ended up in a small town that is virtually a suburb of Halifax. It was there I met my future partner and his wife. I had found work in a large computer store, and he had come in asking about setting up internet access for a campground. Since I was the most qualified of anyone on staff to discuss it, we ended up talking about it over a coffee. He came in quite a few more times to pick my brain. I finally told him that to save driving into Halifax every time he had a question, why not just call me at home since I lived out that way, where I could meet. Tea with him on weekends at the campground that was giving him so many problems. I made several visits to the campground over the following weeks. They were spending quite a bit of money on it to upgrade, so it could be open all year round. Apparently, there was a good market for winter camping, and not many places to accommodate the demand. Since I had helped so much with the campground, Gordon and Heather offered me a partnership. They were trying to raise enough money to finish their modernization project. I had the funds to invest, and did so. In return, I received my partnership and use of the cabin attached to the grounds. Of course, I paid for all the utilities and improvements, but it was still pretty cheap living. Once I got established, I found I could make a better living as a consultant than just selling for a large store. About this time, computer viruses and their assorted cousins were becoming too common. I decided to learn everything I could about the security aspect of computing by taking online courses and night courses at a local college. Within a couple of years, I was a leading authority on internet security, at least in my small part of the planet. I kept my consulting business small enough that I could handle everything myself. I had a small but dedicated client base that I looked after very well. About this time, I was approached by the college about maybe running night classes for adults who wanted to learn about computers, just the basics for email, internet surfing, and the like. The pay wouldn't be much, classes would only buy about 3 hours a week anyway, and I could teach most of the stuff off the cuff. I took the gig and found that I was again enjoying the teaching aspects of the computer industry. I talked to the dean over coffee one day and suggested a formal curriculum with qualified teachers or instructors. If the program got started, he promised that I'd be grandfathered so that I wouldn't need a teaching certificate or master's degree. Eventually, they did start a program based on Microsoft Windows products. There were several different programs and certifications. I taught computer networking and security. I had found my niche. Over the years since I arrived in Halifax, I never had a serious relationship, nor did I want one. After what had happened with my marriage and Bev just walking out, to say I was gun-shy would be a drastic understatement. I did have several short-term relationships, of course, but I think my partners could sense that these were going nowhere, and most left after a short time. I couldn't and wouldn't blame them. Unknown to me while I was traveling, and before getting settled in Nova Scotia, things were developing at a rapid pace back in Vancouver. Pat, my ex-PA, happened to come across a very pregnant Bev in a department store not long after the divorce was final and a couple of months after I'd left Vancouver. She confronted her about leaving and virtually destroying me. Bev had been pregnant with twins when she left me. I never knew. What transpired next I learned many years later. It seemed that someone had seen me having lunch with a beautiful woman one day and thought we were just too friendly. Whoever it was reported this to Bev, who instead of asking or talking to me about it, jumped to a natural and incorrect conclusion. My long days at work and short nights at home over that week had me, in her mind, having an affair. My ex-PA convinced Bev to return with her to the office, and she could check dates and luncheon engagements I'd had. Pat kept records of everything from the day she had been hired. They were able to pinpoint the lunch date in question. It turned out that the beautiful woman was the head of the marketing department. Yes, she was very beautiful and very married. We had a good working relationship, and that's all it ever was. What had been reported to Bev was a misunderstanding and a mistake. If Bev wanted, a meeting could be arranged since the woman still was head of marketing and would verify what Bev was being told. Bev became unglued, apparently, when she realized what had happened, and they almost called for an ambulance to have her admitted to hospital. Before they did, she got composed enough to thank my ex-PA and provide contact details in the event that I ever did get in touch with her or anyone in the company. Of course, I never did. She then contacted my lawyer, who couldn't give her much more information, other than the large sum of money on deposit with a local bank in her name. He had also provided the information to her lawyer. I guess he hadn't got in touch with her. Unfortunately for everyone, the address provided on the account turned out to be the law office. I had virtually disappeared. In the months that followed, Jessica and James were born. Bev continued to try to find me. To no avail, since the internet was fairly new and she didn't have the knowledge or resources to use it. And she didn't have any idea where to start looking. Now she was a single mother with twins and a missing father that knew nothing of them. With the help of the money I'd left for her and her job in nursing, she was able to provide a good home and education for the kids. Eventually, she stopped trying to find me, accepting the fact that I had disappeared from her life. Jessica, as she grew older, wasn't all that convinced that I couldn't be found once she and her brother were told about their father. She and James had grown up with the internet, and were well aware of what could be done. She initiated a wide-sweeping web search over a period of weeks that eventually found my square peg in the round hole. How she narrowed it down to me, I don't know and never did discover, but knowing how the internet works and the resources available, I could hazard a pretty good guess how she managed. Of course, they didn't know for sure that their search was correct, and it would be some time before they would have a chance to check it out. They never did tell their mom that their search had probably been successful since they didn't want to get her hopes up yet again. She had accepted that I had disappeared and hadn't discussed the situation with her children in years. As it turned out, finding me became quite urgent. James had developed a medical condition that could only be cured, if that's the word, by an organ transplant from, preferably, a male relative, in short me. Jessica was certain that she had found me living and working just outside Halifax. She was disappointed to find that there were absolutely no photos of me on the net, which may or may not have clinched it for her. She and James made arrangements to fly to Halifax and track me down. Their excuse to Bev was that they wanted to visit the East Coast since they'd never been there. That fateful Friday, they had missed me at the college by about an hour, but a helpful clerk told them about my stopping at the pub for supper on Fridays and had given them directions on how to get there. I still wasn't aware that I was a father, and was blissfully unaware that the two had only begun to confirm that I was their father. The next morning, I received a phone call from Jessica. "Mr. Ames, I'm really sorry to disturb you. My name, as I said yesterday, is Jessica Ames. I'm almost positive you're my father. Look, Miss Ames, I've been divorced for over 20 years. I don't know where my ex-wife is, and I know for a fact that while we were married that we didn't have any kids. I'm sorry, but I don't think I'm the Ames you're looking for. Look, Mr. Ames, I hate to be a pest, but I think I can prove you're our father. Is there somewhere we can meet? I have some documents and photos I'd like to show you. If, after that, you still feel that we're not related, we'll walk away." I thought about it for a few seconds. "Okay, I guess I can listen to what you have to say. Where are you right now?" "We're at the Bayview in Halifax." She gave the name of a mid-scale hotel near downtown Halifax. "Okay, do you have my address?" No, not really. All that shows up on the GPS is a campground." "That's right. I live in a home attached to that campground. Just drive in and go to the main office. I'll call and tell them you're coming. They'll give you directions to the house and the code for the gate. Mr. Ames, I promise. I think this will be worth your while. Thank you for agreeing to see us. I think it might take us some time. We don't know the area. I'll be here waiting. It's not that far. Thank you so much. You don't know what this means. We'll see you in a while." She ended the call, and I called the office at the campground to advise them I was expecting visitors, probably in half an hour or so, and to give them the access code to the gate for the house. I decided to use the time I had to shower and clean up. Since it was Saturday, unless I had some kind of engagement, it was my habit to just hang out in my sweats, reading or watching TV. I was sitting on the deck sipping a coffee when the rental car pulled up in front of the house. I waved to the young couple and indicated that they could come up the outside stairs to join me, which they quickly did. Jessica was dressed in shirt and jeans with comfortable-looking clogs. James followed slowly behind as she came up the stairs, dressed in t-shirt and jeans. I mistook the slowness for lack of interest. Actually, it was because he was quite ill. "Mr. Ames, it's good to see you again. Thank you for seeing us. I know it's an intrusion." She was obviously the spokesman for the two of them. "Well, since you told me I wouldn't regret it, how could I refuse? Can I get you a coffee or something?" "Sure, coffee would be good." James takes it black. I use a bit of whitener or cream, whichever you have. I went and poured 2 additional mugs of coffee and brought them out on a tray with some cookies and the whitener. Once they got coffee going, I got right down to it. "Okay, you say you have documents and photos. What have you got that brought you to Halifax?" Jessica opened a briefcase that contained several file folders. The first documents were their birth certificates, showing their mother as Beverly Sharon Ames and their father as John Charles Ames. Well, so far the names were correct, but I wasn't buying until they pulled out a photo of a young Bev standing beside a young me at our wedding reception. Mom's had the original of this on a shelf with other photos for as long as I remember. "It is you and her, isn't it? You look the same, older with less hair, but the same. Where did you get this photo?" I was only half listening to her. Until now, I'd put all those horrible memories far behind me. Like I said, our mom has the original on a shelf with other photos. I scanned it to bring a copy with us. She pulled more photos out of the folder and laid them on the table in front of me. Most of these are us growing up, graduating, that kind of thing. There's a few of the three of us. Mom was always involved in what we were doing. I was stunned. These two were actually my children. I hadn't known a thing about them until this very moment. Tears were welling in my eyes as I asked, "How is it I didn't know about you too? Your mother wasn't pregnant when I last saw her so many years ago." "Well, Mr. Ames, Dad, Father. We call you Dad?" In a fog, I nodded my assent. "Mom was waiting to surprise you when she left you. I can tell you a bit about it, but not too much since most of it happened before we were born." Jessica went on to relate what she knew of what had happened after I left Vancouver. "So, your mother never remarried?" "No, she never even had any boyfriends. She was so absolutely devastated at what she had done that it took her a long, long time to come to terms with it. We were too young to appreciate it at the time, but she spent a lot of time in therapy learning to live with her mistake." My voice couldn't hide my bitterness. "Yeah, she left without a note or anything. To this day, I don't know why she would do such a thing. It took a long, long time for me to move on. I'm not sure I ever want to go back to remembering what used to be. I don't know that I'd ever be able to forgive her for that." I took a deep breath. "What you haven't told me is why you came looking. Like it's not that you needed me now. You grew up without a father and seem to be doing okay. It's not her or us. It's James. She doesn't know we're here, or at least that we came looking for you. She thinks the two of us are just here on vacation. James has a medical condition that will kill him unless he receives a transplant. The thing is, it should be from a male family member. And I'm it? Yes. I know we don't have any right to ask that of you, but it's James' only hope." "James, you haven't said anything. Does she usually do all the talking for you?" "Yes, sir. Ever since we both learned how to talk, she's never stopped." He gave a small grin. "I know, as Jess says, that we really have no right to ask, but you're my last hope. No other treatments have worked, and we've tried everything since we didn't know who or where our father was until just recently. So, just what is it you have? And why just you and not both of you if you're twins?" "That's a fair enough question," he replied. "Apparently, it's something that only males can develop, or predominantly males anyway. The actual word is about 10 syllables long, but it basically boils down to me needing a liver transplant since my liver is failing, and it should be from a male family member. So, Jessica managed to track you down. It took quite a while. Nobody expected you'd be on the East Coast. Even that lady that used to work for you, the PA." "You mean Patricia?" "Yes, that's right. She goes by Pat. Anyway, she told us that you never did get in touch with her despite saying you would. I think she even called a lawyer you used to use, and even he didn't have any idea where you were. I don't really need to explain, but well, after that happened, I just wanted to leave that life and everything that happened behind. I'd succeeded fairly well, too, until yesterday, when you two showed up. I still couldn't wrap my head around the fact that I was, and had been all this time, a father. So, after all these years out of my life, you just show up hoping I'd donate an organ? Sorry, that's a bit blunt, but look at it from my point of view. Until a few minutes ago, I never knew you existed. Yes, we appreciate that. It's a lot to ask. Mom doesn't know why we've come here. She doesn't know we found you. Okay, as a working hypothesis, if, and I mean a big if, I agree to this, where's this transplant supposed to take place? And what makes you think I'll even qualify? Like, I've never been tested or treated for this stuff. Okay, first, we've been working with St. Paul's Hospital in Vancouver. If it goes ahead, and we really do understand your reluctance, we're hoping it would be there." I interrupted. "No way, not in Vancouver. I'm never, ever setting foot back there again. And you can take that to the bank. We thought you might say that, so we had them contact a hospital here in Halifax. As for testing and treatment, since you're a related male, the only test required would be to confirm that, and that your liver function is adequate. Then it's just a matter of arranging hospital time and dates." Jessica had this all figured out except for one thing. I hadn't yet agreed to anything so radical. It's not like someone my age just gives up part of a liver, or any other organ just because we're asked. We sat in silence for quite a few minutes. Of course, my mind was swirling in 100 different directions. I wasn't all that sure that James and Jessica knew exactly what they were asking, or the implications as far as it related to my future well-being. I broke the silence. "Look, this is a bit much to digest all at once. I'm going to need time to think this over. Of course, we understand, Dad. It's sudden and it's a big, huge favor to ask from someone we've just met and who doesn't know us. We'll leave you to sort it out. We'll be at the Bayview for a couple more days. Maybe do some sightseeing while we're here, since that's why Mom thinks we're here. She picked up their birth certificates and a few other documents, but left the photos. Bev had been and still was a good-looking woman. She'd aged well, better than I had. I assured James and Jessica that I'd be in touch in the next day or so. I needed to talk this over with someone whose judgment I trusted and wouldn't be tainted by emotion. I found myself back at my favorite pub. Gail was working, as was another server, but it wasn't all that busy. "Jack, you're here on a Saturday? Are you okay?" she joked. "Well, sort of," I replied in a subdued tone. "Gail, I need to talk to someone I can trust. When do you get your break? You're not okay, are you?" "Why me?" she asked. "'Cause I can trust you to be objective. You're a people person. I need someone I trust to listen and give me a pointer on how to handle this." "Okay, Jack. I'll let the boss know I'm taking my break early. Why don't you go sit in that booth over there?" She pointed to a quiet booth in the far corner, where we won't be interrupted. "You got me curious and worried now." "Oh, it's nothing for you to worry about, honest. I just want your opinion." "Okay, go sit down. I'll be there in a moment." She went in back to let the boss know her change of plans. Gail is one of the few people I really trust. Her husband is in the Navy, but she made it well known to anybody who tried anything that she was a one-man woman. She wouldn't fool around on her husband during his long deployments. That was one of the reasons I valued her opinion. I had a respect for her that I had for very few people. She joined me in the booth, bringing coffees instead of the usual beer. I related the story as I knew it to that point, including the fact that Bev didn't know the real reason the kids had traveled down here. "So there you have it. I just want your opinion on being a donor. I'm torn between saying no since I don't know them from a hole in the wall to yes, because he's my own flesh and blood. I just don't know Gail. I just don't. Well, I don't know that I can give you a totally objective opinion. Simply put, I think of you as a friend. In all the years you've come in here, you've never put a move on me or tried to pick me up or anything. You're one of the few who treat me like a real person. But looking at it from your son's point of view, I can see why they're here. You're his last hope for a fairly normal life. So you think I should agree?" "I didn't say that. I just think that they've run out of choices. So it's me or maybe a machine or even death. Is that what you mean?" "Exactly. What I think is that you should spend a few days with them before deciding. Go sightseeing. Show them around as if they're just visitors to the city, which they are. That will give you a chance to get to know them, to see if you even want to consider going ahead. The worst that could happen is that you get to see parts of the city again that you probably haven't seen for a while." "God, I'm glad I came and talked to you. I hadn't thought of that at all, and they did mention doing some sightseeing." "Thank you, Gail. You're a true friend." "You're more than welcome, Jack. Happy to help. Now, I've got to get back to work." "Oh no, I'm sorry. I talked all through your dinner break." "Not really. I usually just grab a coffee and put my feet up. I eat when I get home." "Jack, I'm glad I could help really. Now go sightseeing. I'll call them in the morning." "Thanks, Gail. Good night." I left the pub, feeling better than I had for quite a few hours. As Gail had said, if nothing else, I'd get to visit my city again. I called the hotel early the next morning, hoping that Jessica and James hadn't already left on their adventures. I offered to show them around the various sites and maybe visit a few places that most tourists didn't get to see. I called my boss at home, saying it was a family emergency. He said he'd arrange for a substitute for a few days. Well, it might be only a few right now, but maybe more later. I'd know within those few days. It was fun being a tour guide. I'd forgotten, or at least taken for granted, how much the city had to offer visitors. For 3 days, we were on the go from almost dawn to well after dusk. I found that James tired easily, and our pace was more or less dictated by his ability to keep up. I know that in a few places, he was happy to have the wheelchair provided so Jessica or I could push him around. I found myself warming to these two young, genuine people. There were no airs, no pretensions. Just two young, funny, genuine people who were happy to have me as a tour guide through this wonderful city. Despite my initial misgivings, I found myself thoroughly enjoying being with them and showing the sights. They frankly admitted that they knew virtually nothing about the east coast of Canada, other than the little information passed on in history and geography classes. True to my word, I got them into some places that the usual tourist would never see and avoided some of the worst tourist traps. Finally, it had to end. Their time was up, and I had to go back to classes for another month. I had decided, even before the last day, that if I qualified, I would be a donor for James. However, I didn't tell them until our last night together at dinner. When I made my surprise announcement, it was met with a stunned silence. They truly hadn't expected me to make a decision so soon. Okay, now here's how it is. I'm quite willing to be a donor for James if all the tests are okay and the powers that be, whoever they are, decide it can be done. However, there are a couple of stipulations. Agreed. I would donate, but it would be on my terms. They nodded, so I continued. First, it's between the three of us, nobody else, including your mother. She's not to know where I am or what I'm doing. You'll probably have to tell her that I'm the donor, but that's all she needs to know. Second, it must take place in early July. That will give me most of the summer to recover. I don't have any idea what the time frame is, so you'll have to get the clinic to clue me in. Third, the first two conditions are non-negotiable. This is between the three of us and the hospital. Nobody, and I do mean nobody else. Do we understand each other? 7 kinds of emotions danced across their faces before Jessica came to my side of the table and gave me a huge hug. James reached across and took my hand in both of his. They were too overcome to speak for a couple of minutes. Finally, Jessica said, "Well, you know how to make a memorable evening. We can't even begin to thank you. We know you've thought a lot about it, so I won't ask if you really mean what you say. As for the rest, well, we'll work it out somehow. I'll call the clinic in Vancouver tomorrow, so they can get the ball rolling here. Can I give them your work number as well as home?" "Sure, and I'll make sure you have my cell too. They can always get hold of me on it." We finished dinner, and since they had an early flight, we made an early night of it. I was both glad and sad to see them go, but knew I'd be talking to them often over the next few weeks. If everything went according to plan, I'd see them again in early July, about 6 weeks from now. I returned to my home and prepared for classes the next day. My students would be taking their certification exams over the next weeks, and I was certain there would be a lot of last-minute questions. At noon the next day, I was just starting my lunch break when my cell warbled an incoming call. It was the transplant clinic. Would I be available for initial screening on Friday? I set up a time and arranged for a substitute instructor to take my class for a couple of hours. Other than taking a lot of time, like hurry up and wait, the initial testing didn't amount to much, mostly taking numerous vials of blood and pissing in the bottle. If these were good, the next batch would be more thorough. I was able to arrange that any further testing would be done in late afternoon, so as not to be too disruptive for my students. I was also able to emphasize to the nurse, very young, very pretty, and very officious, that my students took precedence, especially since it was nearing year end. Over the next few weeks, I gave more blood than a vampire, pissed in more bottles than I knew existed, and had more interviews than I thought necessary. In the end, I was deemed suitable, and now it was up to the hospital to schedule the surgeries. As I told Jessica and James, it had to be early July, so I would have the whole summer to recover. During all this time, I was getting constant phone calls, text messages, and emails from James and Jessica, filling me in on what was happening on the West Coast. Finally, I got word that the surgeries, since both James and I had to be done at the same time, were scheduled for July 4th. They actually arranged for his surgeon to fly to Halifax to do the actual transplant. The next thing was accommodation. James would be in hospital for at least a month, probably more, and me anywhere up to a month, depending on how well and how fast I healed. I decided to offer my home to Jessica since she would be coming in daily to support James. And for that matter, me post-surgery. She readily accepted, stating that she really hadn't looked forward to living in a hotel for that length of time, especially at the height of tourist season. I had the room, so why not? They arrived late on the afternoon of July 2nd and were on their way to the hospital early the next afternoon. With some trepidation, I entered the hospital in the early evening. James and Jessica were already there and waiting for me since his preparations took longer. They had told me early evening, so early evening it was when I showed up. They must have an express lane for organ donors since as soon as I told the admitting desk why I was there, they couldn't do enough for me. I had my own personal escort to take me to my ward where she sat with me until one of the nurses came in and told her they, meaning the medical staff, would take it from there. I wasn't allowed anything to eat or drink. However, I was allowed to suck on ice cubes for my dry throat. Eventually, I fell into a restless sleep. A nurse woke me up at some ungodly hour to prep me for surgery. Then the gas passer came in to tell me what to expect. The last person I saw before going into surgery was the actual surgeon. He explained again exactly what was going to happen and asked if I had any questions. When I asked why this stuff always takes place at the crack of dawn, he and the nurses laughed and I relaxed a bit. I'll be fine. I have no idea what time it was when I regained consciousness. My side hurt abominably and my throat felt dry and raw. It took a few moments to realize where I was and why I was there. A nurse must have been either sitting with me or very nearby since she was there almost as soon as I awoke. "Mr. Ames, welcome back. The surgery went well and you're both recovering. James isn't awake yet. Can I get you anything?" I'm paraphrasing since I have no idea exactly what she said, only the "went well" part took hold in my conscience. I must have gone back to sleep. The next time I awoke, it was dark. The same nurse must have been waiting for me to regain consciousness again, since she was there as soon as I opened my eyes. Now I realized why my throat felt dry and raw. There was a tube stuck down it. That sort of inhibited talking, so my responses were limited to nods or shakes of my head. She made some notes on the ubiquitous chart, adjusted something on the floor attached to my arm, and I was asleep again. The next time I awoke, it was still dark, but that damn tube had been removed from my throat. A different nurse was there now, and she made similar comments as to welcome back, etc. I was able to get her to give me a sip of cold water. It felt like heaven going down my sore throat. Of course, my side and back hurt from where they had removed a piece of my liver. I was just beginning to appreciate why exactly I was in a hospital. The nurse assured me that rest was the best thing for my recovery. The surgeon would be in some time in the morning to see me, and the staff would be happy to give me any help I needed. It would be a few hours before I knew exactly what that would entail. I had no experience with bedpans and the like, and I wouldn't wish that on anyone. It was about the 4th day since the operation when Jessica came to see me. Oh, she'd been there before, quite a few times, but I wasn't aware enough to realize it. She again expressed her and James' gratitude for donating a piece of my liver. We talked of many mundane things over the ensuing days. She had given my home a thorough cleaning, sort of as therapy to take her mind off of what was going on in the hospital. She had met my partners and told them what was going on and why she was in the house. In all the confusion, I hadn't mentioned it to them for the simple reason I hadn't seen them for what seemed like months. They would make a point of coming to visit before I was sent home. I could tell Jessica was holding something back, but I wasn't in any shape to press the issue. Anyway, whatever it was, there was nothing I could do about it. In the early stages of my recovery, they had allowed me to see James. I had been assured that the transplant went well, and he was recovering nicely. He would, however, spend quite a long time in ICU. I had been moved to a semi-private ward after 2 days. I wondered if James would be moved into the ward with me. It would make sense for us and for visitors. Early one afternoon, I woke up from one of my mini naps and sensed that someone was sitting beside my bed. The room was fairly dark, but I could tell it was a her, though I couldn't make out any features. Whoever she wasn't at first aware I was awake until I stirred and reached to get some water. "Hello, Jack," said Bev. "My name is Beverly Sharon Ames, and this is about how, because of one stupid, immature moment, I totally screwed up my life and basically ruined that of a good, innocent man. Jack and I met in high school and were pretty much inseparable from the start. We dated through university, though we never lived together, and married just after we both graduated. I was a nurse and got hired on as an OR nurse with St. Paul's Hospital in Vancouver. Jack had a job waiting for him at a large software development company located near the downtown area. We had a good life. We made love whenever the urge took us. There was no schedule or date. We were both paid well and were able to buy a small house on a good-sized lot in Vancouver's trendy West End. There were and are lots of young professionals living in that area. We did all the usual things that young couples do, and we had a very active social life. Both of our parents had passed within months of each other, and it allowed us to be debt-free except for the mortgage on our house. It seemed we were always on the go and loved living that life. One day, I was having lunch with a couple of other nurses in the cafeteria when one mentioned that she had seen my husband, Jack, having lunch with a very attractive woman, and that they seemed to be on more than friendly terms. I thought nothing much of it at the time. Jack was always having lunch with clients or even his team members. The following weekend was nothing special until Jack got called into work to help his team troubleshoot a problem they had been working on all weekend. As leader, he usually would only be called in on the weekend if there was some sort of emergency. I didn't see him until late Sunday night, and by the time I got up Monday, he had already left for work. I hardly saw him all week. He was gone before me in the morning and usually arrived home late, much later than usual, would have something to eat and collapse in a bed, and the whole thing repeated for the entire week. Because of this, for some reason, I remembered the conversation of the previous week and came to the conclusion that he wasn't working, he was having an affair. Stupid and immature, I know. When the situation kept repeating, by Wednesday night, I was convinced. Thursday, I arranged for an indefinite leave of absence to begin the next day. Of course, Friday he was gone before I got up as he had been all week. Shortly after he left for work, I packed everything I owned, or thought was mine, into my car. I had found, by chance, a fully furnished apartment in the nearby city of Burnaby. I could commute to work by transit since it ran right past the front door of the apartment block. When I left the house for the last time, I never even left a note for Jack to tell him I was pregnant and he was going to be the father of twins, or why I was leaving. I settled into my apartment and found a lawyer who specialized in divorce cases. After some discussion, we decided that the reason would be irreconcilable differences as opposed to adultery, since I really had no evidence to support that. I also had him stipulate that my whereabouts or contact information was absolutely not to be provided to Jack or his lawyer. My lawyer received the documents back, signed about 2 weeks later. Attached was a note from Jack asking why I had left. I never did reply. In hindsight, which is always 20/20ths, I wish I had, or even better, that he had contested the divorce. After about 2 months, I went back to work. I could work up to about the 8th month of my pregnancy, which was going well. Except for the huge hole in my heart, I was doing okay. It must have been about 3 months after the divorce was final that I met his PA, Pat. Of course, she accosted me, asking why I had ruined a good man's life. Left him without a word. I'm afraid I wasn't very pleasant to her, since I believed at the time I was the wrong party. She adamantly defended Jack and even persuaded me to accompany her back to her office so I could see for myself that Jack was totally innocent. Pat was able to show me, since she had all his calendars for the years he'd worked there, that the woman in question was head of marketing for the company, and if I wanted confirmation that it was business, she, Pat, would arrange a meeting. Everyone knew Jack had a good working relationship with the various department heads. All he had done was have lunch with a colleague. I'm afraid at that point that I totally lost it. I was embarrassed, of course, but worse, I was just now realizing how wrong I had been to doubt the love of my husband, the love of Jack. The enormity set in, and the staff at his office, or what used to be his office, almost had to call an ambulance. I was nearly hysterical. I managed to settle down enough to thank Pat, determined that nobody had heard anything from Jack since he'd quit, and leave her my contact information in case they ever did hear from him. I went back to my apartment and cried myself to sleep. I must have slept, finally, for about 10 hours. I called the lawyer that Jack had used for the divorce and arranged to meet him. He provided me information for a bank account that Jack had opened for me, along with an accounting of the sale of the house. The lawyer had no idea where Jack had gone and hadn't heard from him since the sale of the house. Jack had disappeared. Everything I tried came up empty. Nobody we knew or ever socialized with had heard a thing about him or from him since the day of the divorce or since he had left. I was on my own with 2 babies due in a couple of months, and it was nobody's fault but mine. After the kids were born, I went back to work. Because of the money Jack had left for me, we lived better than most single-parent families. Jessica and James grew up to be funny, smart young people. They always had good grades throughout school, and no parent was prouder when they walked across the stage to graduate from high school. They both had academic scholarships to university. It was about this time that James became sick. When he finally got to see a specialist, the news wasn't good. He needed a liver transplant from a male donor who was also a family member. I could only think of one possibility, Jack, and nobody knew where he was. I wasn't aware that the kids had managed to find their father using the internet. I seldom used a computer, used to doing things the old-fashioned way like telephone and actually writing letters, snail mail as the kids call it. After they had graduated, they advised me that they were taking a vacation and flying to the East Coast since they had never seen it. Although I was somewhat surprised at their choice, I trust them and they made the arrangements. They left about the middle of May. They returned about 10 days later. I knew from their demeanor that something was going on, but for the life of me, I couldn't figure out what it was. There were numerous hush phone calls, late evening emailing, and the like. I could only surmise it had something to do with James' illness. The fact that they were actually corresponding with Jack never occurred to me. Dumb, I know, but I didn't understand the power of the internet and how well my kids had adapted to it. Finally, the day came when they were to fly back to Halifax. That's when Jessica broke down and told me everything about why they had gone to the East Coast, how they had found and met Jack, and how he had agreed to donate part of his liver to James. That accounted for all the secret phone calls and emails. I was really pissed at the two of them for holding out on me until they told me of the conditions for the transplant. I was not to be informed, at least his whereabouts. Jessica and James had sat down one night and discussed it at some length. They decided since he was going east for major surgery, I had to be told, even though the one major condition for Jack agreeing to the transplant had been broken. They vowed to keep that betrayal from him. They flew to the East Coast the next morning. I was torn in 10 different directions. Should I leave things as they are since we had both gone on with our lives? Should I fly down? What would I say to Jack? Could I really expect him to forgive me after all these years? Did I even deserve to be forgiven? I thought and thought about it for 2 days, then decided that I would take some vacation time and fly down to Halifax, but I wouldn't tell Jessica or James until I actually arrived. I'd call Jessica on her cell from the Halifax airport. I flew out to Halifax on the same flight as the kids. Only 5 days later, James had had his surgery and was improving daily. Jessica didn't mention Jack. I called Jessica as soon as I got off the plane while waiting for my baggage. Here was the height of tourist season, and I hadn't even booked a hotel room. I hoped I'd be able to stay with Jessica, at least for a few days. Jessica was a bit upset when I called. It turns out she was living in Jack's house while he was in the hospital. Now I didn't know what to do. Jessica did drive out and pick me up. We talked about it on the way back into Halifax and decided to go straight to the hospital. Accommodations could be sorted out later. First, we went to see James. He seemed to be doing quite well and said he felt a lot better. Weak, but better. He made a few jokes about his condition. I knew he was on the mend. He hoped to be moved from the ICU in a couple of days. I didn't want to go, but Jessica dragged me down to Jack's room before she returned to talk to James. It was a 2-bed ward, but the second bed was empty. I looked down at the man I had wronged. He was just as I remembered him, though he'd lost some hair and was graying. Other than that, he was almost exactly like I remembered, and exactly who I had loved and wronged. He awoke, stirred, and reached for a water glass. I said, "Hello, Jack." It took me a few moments to realize that it was Bev standing there. What was she doing here? How did she know? Jessica and James would have some explaining to do. As it was, I had no desire to interact with Bev or talk to her at all. I pushed the call button for the nurse, who came into the room almost instantly. "Mr. Ames, are you okay? Do you need anything?" "Yes," I croaked. "Get her out of here. I don't want any visitors." The nurse escorted Bev out before she had a chance to say any more. That part of my life was over, and I had no desire to revisit it. Jessica came into the room a short time later, after visiting James. "Dad, I'm sorry. We told her before we flew out here, but didn't know she was going to fly out as well. I didn't know until she called me from the airport. What does the phrase 'between the three of us' mean to you? You and James gave me your word. Looks to me like you can't be trusted." I managed to croak out, "Dad, I hope you wouldn't feel that way." Yes, we had to tell her. She would have figured it out anyway. She's an or nurse, for God's sake. I honestly had no idea she would fly down here. Can we talk about this later? We have to find somewhere for her to stay. In my croaking voice, I said, "If I was feeling any better, you both would be looking. I'm really, really pissed and disappointed in you. When you give your word, it's supposed to mean something. It builds a trust. If you break your word, you break the trust. You're going to find life really hard if you can't keep your word. Now, get out of here. I don't want to talk to you." I turned my head away so she couldn't see the hurt in my eyes. She left the ward, quietly crying. Eventually, I went back to sleep. As the doctor said, rest was the best medicine. It was easy to get my body to rest. I was too sore to move much, but not so easy for my mind. I was really pissed at the two kids, well, young adults, I guess. But as much as I was upset, I felt that sometime I should hear from Bev exactly why she left me without a word. I'd have to think about it for a while. I was far too tired and upset to think rationally. At Jessica's suggestion and Gordon and Heather's insistence after Jessica asked them, Bev moved into the third bedroom of Jack's home. She didn't have too many affordable choices. The room was pretty much bare except for a bed and nightstand. Obviously, it was used mostly for storage. Heather came over shortly after Bev, and Jessica arrived from the hospital. She knew about Jessica and James, but nothing of Bev, or even who she was. After meeting Bev, Heather knew this situation was going to be, to say the least, awkward. She knew Jack was divorced, of course, but he had never discussed the matter. She knew he seemed content to live by himself and have a quiet, uneventful life. Over coffee, the three women discussed what should be done. It wouldn't be fair to ask Bev to move, and there was little likelihood of her finding somewhere to stay for more than a night or two. After a lot of talking about the various alternatives, they decided that Bev would stay there, at least for the time being, and nothing would be said to Jack. If she was still here when he was released from hospital, they would deal with that at that time. The following day, Jessica and Bev went to visit James. They didn't want to take a chance of further aggravating Jack, so didn't go to his room, or even let him know they had been visiting. They were still with James when Gordon and Heather came to visit Jack. The next day, my partner and his wife showed up for a visit. They were busy helping at the campground. It was that time of year, and it was pretty much full every night. Gordon said the usual platitudes and hoped I'd get well. Heather, on the other hand, said she wanted to get something off her chest. She had met and chatted with both Jessica and Bev yesterday. Jack, I know it's not Gordon and me, it's not our place to tell you how to run your life. But I have to say this. You really should talk with those two women. I think Jessica is more upset at herself than you for not keeping her word. After she left the hospital yesterday, she was feeling pretty miserable. Yes, she broke her word, but to a certain extent you have to look at it from her point of view. They were coming here, so her brother could have major surgery. Bev is a nurse. There's no way on God's green earth they'd be able to hide that from her. They did well to keep the secret as long as they did. I muttered. Where I come from, your word means everything. If they wanted to tell their mother, why didn't they ask me first? I can't answer that. All I can say is they're both extremely grateful to you for your sacrifice. And yes, that's exactly what it is. Me and Gordon don't know the story with your ex. You've never mentioned it, and we didn't feel it to be in our place to ask. My point is, now that she's here, maybe you should sit down and talk with her once you're out of here and feeling better. She says she'll be here for a few weeks, until James is back on his feet. And exactly what would that do beside dredge up memories best forgotten? I wasn't going to let her off that easy. I have a life here, a good life. I'm quite content living the way I do. All those memories will just bring back the hurt and betrayal. I don't need that. Heather was more insightful than I gave her credit for. Yeah, you're content, but you're not happy. There's a huge difference. You teach, you consult, then you go home to that huge, empty house. You may be content, but that's all you are, and you're content by yourself. Yeah, you're right. But if you want to argue about it, you'll lose. I'm by myself by choice. After what Bev did to me, I made a pact with myself that I would never, ever allow myself to be put in a position where that could happen again. I made that pact to myself over 20 years ago, and I haven't seen one single thing that would make me change my mind, nothing. My voice was quickly tiring, as was I. This was taking more out of me than I had to give. Look, I appreciate what you're saying. We'll agree to disagree on this. Now I'm getting pretty tired and losing my voice. Can we do this another day? Of course, Jack. Sorry to lecture you. Sometimes I get carried away. She gave me a light peck on the cheek and left, followed by Gordon after he just patted me on the shoulder and gave me a small grin. He didn't need to say anything. He could sense what I was thinking. Over the ensuing few days, I received more and more visits from the surgeon who had operated on me. I should have been getting stronger, but wasn't. The doctor who performed the actual transplant had returned to British Columbia as soon as he was satisfied that James was on the mend. I didn't realize it at the time, but I had developed a post-operative infection and was running a fever. Antibiotics were having little effect, and it looked like they might have to open me up again. That decision was made for them when I lapsed into unconsciousness in the middle of the night. I guess all the machines I was hooked up to started beeping and sounding some kind of alarm. I didn't wake up until 2 days later. I was back in ICU. A nurse was in the room with me, monitoring everything, taking temperatures, blood pressure, and all the rest of it. She saw that I was sort of awake. "Mr. Ames, welcome back. We were really worried about you. I'll let the surgeon know you're back with us. Be right back." She quickly left the room, only to reappear a few minutes later. "Okay," we advised the surgeon. "He's in or right now, but we'll come in as soon as he's finished there. Meanwhile, you just rest. Someone will be with you at all times until they tell us different." I just nodded my head a bit. I couldn't do much else with a tube down my throat and wires running everywhere. When I awoke a while later, the surgeon was in the room discussing me quietly with the nurse. They noticed that I was again conscious. "Mr. Ames, I'm Dr. Hartley. You gave us quite a scare. You developed a post-op infection from your first surgery when you donated part of your liver. We tried to fight it with just antibiotics, but they didn't work. I had to operate again to discover the source of the infection. You had an abscess. We don't know exactly why, but it does happen. You're on very strong antibiotics and will be for a while. Your fever has abated somewhat, but we'll be monitoring you here in ICU for a few days. You just continue to rest. That's the best medicine we can give you. I'll check in every day. Meanwhile, the staff will take good care of you." He made some notes on my chart and left the room. The nurse came over and fluffed my pillow and asked if I was comfortable. I didn't honestly know. I heard all over. Mercifully, I went back to sleep. The next time I woke up, Jessica was sitting beside my bed, reading a novel. As soon as she noticed I was awake, she left to let the nurses know and came back. "Dad, we were so scared. Me and James, don't want to lose you again." She looked like she was crying, or at least had been. "As soon as a nurse comes, I'll go let James know. He's worried sick. He's getting better and might be released in a few weeks. He's down in the same room you were in before they had to operate again." I could only nod my head slightly. That damn tube was still down my throat. It had been sore and raw before, now it was worse. A nurse came in to check my vital signs. Sort of redo. Since that's what the machines were doing, but I guess they needed a person to actually do it once in a while. She made a note on the chart and told me that as soon as Dr. Hartley was available, they'd get the tube removed from my throat. I guess I was well enough to breathe on my own again. Jessica had freed up the staff by agreeing to sit with me. The nurses weren't too far away and checked everything frequently. I went back to sleep again. I was having this weird dream. Someone was talking to me, telling me about their life. I couldn't tell who it was, but I thought I should know this person. I was fairly certain it was a female, but I couldn't see any features. The voice was quiet and comforting. I slept on. Sometime later, I'm not sure if I woke up or just regained consciousness. Light was streaming into the room through the half-open blinds. I could see someone standing there, looking out the window, but had no way of knowing who it was. To my eyes, it was just a silhouette. I ached all over, and my throat felt raw from that damn tube still in it. The machines surrounding me continued their monotonous beep, beep, beep. The silhouette turned and walked back toward my bed. Finally, I could see her features. It was Bev. Now I was confused. What was she doing here? And why am I here? And where is here exactly? These thoughts came flooding through my mind as I tried to figure out what was going on. Gradually, it came back. The transplant, the infection. But that didn't explain Bev. She wasn't supposed to be here. As I found out later, Jessica had agreed to sit with me for most of the day. Of course, she wanted to be with her brother, who was apparently well on the mend. Bev had agreed to sit with me during the late evening and really early morning hours, usually from about 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. The reasoning was that I would probably be okay with Jessica, but not with Bev. The reasoning was correct. A few days after I was again removed from ICU and put in a semi-private ward, Jessica came in to visit after having visited James, who was in a ward across the hall from mine. He, too, was in a semi-private ward, and like me, had no roommates at the present time. Anyway, Jessica came in with an envelope in her hand. "Dad, hi, how are you feeling?" She did the normal platitudes. I was still a bit pissed at her and James for breaking their word, at least without talking to me first. I had already talked to her about that, and didn't want to bring up the subject again. "Hi, Jess. How's James doing? He should be up and around soon, no?" "He's doing good, Dad. He's up and walking a bit. And you should be too." Yeah, I know. Probably tomorrow if Dr. Hartley gives the go-ahead. I was curious about the envelope, but didn't ask. I didn't even know if it was for or about me. If it was, I'd find out soon enough. The answer to my unasked question arrived almost immediately. Dad, I know you don't want to talk about Mom. Please just hear me out. I already told you about what happened after you left Vancouver. I don't know the whole story, of course, since we weren't around then. Mom wrote you a letter, a long one, explaining what happened and why. All me and James, ask is that you at least read it. With some trepidation, Jessica handed me the envelope. I didn't open it. Time enough for that later. So, your mother is still here? Yes. And before you ask, she's been staying with me at your house. I was almost ready to become unglued at the unwanted and, to my mind, unwarranted intrusion into my life when she quickly continued. I talked it over with your partners since you weren't in any shape to talk to me. Anyway, they suggested that she stay with me since you weren't there anyway. She's used the small third bedroom. We all know you won't like it, and believe me, we understand, but she had nowhere else to go. I was, as she had surmised, well and truly pissed at the whole bunch of them, my partners included. She could have gone back home to Vancouver, or better yet stayed there, I said. I tried, unsuccessfully, to keep the anger out of my voice. Dad, that was the plan. As soon as James was out of ICU and on the mend, she was going to go back to Vancouver. Then you got that infection. Dad, every night while you were in ICU, she sat with you all night. I was there during the day, and she was with you every night. I know you probably don't remember, but she talked to you and basically said everything that's in the letter. She was pleading, on the verge of bursting into tears. And I guess everything is supposed to be just hunky-dory and back to normal. I don't think so. Nobody expects that, Dad. Mom just wants you to hear from her what happened and why. That's all. She has no expectations. That's good, because I'm not even sure if I want to read her explanation. That happened a long time ago, and I have no interest in revisiting the past. If anything, I'd prefer it stay buried. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm tired. I rolled over on my good side, summarily dismissing her. I could hear her crying as she left the ward and closed the door. I got the okay from Dr. Hartley to start walking, at first up and down the hall of the wards, then I'd progress to the treadmill in the physiotherapy unit. I have to say that if this is what old age feels like, I want to die young. It took days before I could walk the length of the hallway unaided, and that was only a matter of 100 feet or so. My time on the treadmill was measured, at first in seconds and later in minutes. It took weeks before I felt that I was walking at a somewhat normal pace. 2 days after Jessica had dropped off the letter from Bev, I finally got around to reading it. I didn't want to at first, since I sort of knew what was coming from my talks with Jessica and James, but I'd never, at least consciously, heard it from Bev herself. Letter from Bev to Jack. Dear Jack, now that I've found you, or at least Jessica and James have, I feel it my responsibility to tell you what happened and why over 20 years ago. This is not to excuse my actions. I wronged you totally. Everything that happened after I left you is my fault. I have lived with my guilt ever since that terrible time. This is what I did and why. About a week before I left you, I was having lunch with a couple of fellow nurses. One of them mentioned that she had seen you having lunch with a beautiful woman, and that you appeared to be more than friendly. I didn't think anything of it at the time, because you always told me you were having lunch with clients or colleagues. Anyway, the following Sunday you got called into work. Your team was having trouble with some code they were working on or something. You came home late and were gone the next morning before I was up. This repeated for the rest of the week. I never saw you. You came home after I'd gone to bed and were gone in the morning before I was awake. By Wednesday, I remembered the conversation with the other nurse. I convinced myself that you were having an affair. Thursday, I arranged for an immediate leave of absence and planned to leave the house, our house, after you had gone to work on the Friday. And that's what I did. Jack, I was so wrong. I jumped to the conclusion that you were having an affair. With the hours you were putting in, I didn't see you at all that week. Instead of calling your office and talking to you, or waiting up until you got home, in my mind I'd already decided that I was leaving you to your new lover. Jack, if that's what made you happy, I was willing to get out of your life, totally. I didn't understand it since I thought we were happy, so much in love. I should never have doubted that. That's why I gave my lawyer instructions about not revealing my whereabouts. You didn't fight the divorce. I didn't answer the note you sent back with the divorce papers, since you only asked why I had left, and I assumed that you already knew. I don't know why, but if you had fought the divorce or I had answered your note, my mistake could have been corrected and our lives would have been totally different. I didn't want to tell you about the twins. If you weren't going to be their dad, you had no reason to know about them. Jack, it just tore me up. I was bitter for a long, long time. It wasn't until I ran across your PA, Pat, in a supermarket that I found out how wrong I was. She talked me into going back to her, your office, and checking your appointment calendar. We determined that you were having lunch with the manager of marketing. I admit that she is a beautiful woman, but as I found out, she was very married and would not have thought of having an affair with you or anyone else. You were just having lunch with a colleague. Pat offered to let me talk to her, but by now I realized what I had done, how much I had wronged you. I still had a couple of months until the twins were born and did what I could to find you during that time. Jack, dear Jack, I was so wrong. You had disappeared, and it was totally my fault. The children would not have a dad while they were growing up. I spent a long time in therapy learning to live with my guilt. It's never left me, the guilt. I just learned how to accept that it will always be part of me and try to get on with my life. I kept our wedding portrait on the mantle of the house where I raised the twins. I know now that Jessica made a copy and gave it to you. I have many others of us or the twins or with me and the twins. Instead of having you, the man that I loved totally, all I had was a memory. I never, ever wanted to be in a situation where I could so grievously hurt someone else again, so I never remarried. Actually, I hardly ever dated in all these years. As much as I wounded you, I had also wounded myself. And I have never, not ever forgiven myself for what I did to you. I have always hoped that you were happy with your new life, WH. Wherever it was, you have met Jessica and James. They are two wonderful kids who managed to grow up without a dad. They asked about you, naturally, but I could only tell them what I had done. I didn't know until a few days ago where you were. If it hadn't been for Jessica and her knowledge of computers and how to get information from the internet, I'm afraid that I would have died with the guilt I have, and you would never have known. I can't speak to the generosity you have shown, James. How does one describe giving back a chance for a normal life? You did that, Jack, without having had the joy of watching your children grow up, to be with them at their sporting events, to see them grow and mature into two wonderful young adults. You weren't there for any of the highs and lows while they grew up. You weren't there, and it was all my fault, not yours. Dear Jack, I don't expect you to forgive me, although I hope beyond hope that at some time you'll at least not hate me. You don't and didn't deserve what I did to you. I do so much want to sit down and talk to you, to hear the voice I miss so much, to tell you in person how much you still mean to me. I understand if you don't want to talk with me, but I'm hoping you will. Love, Bev. Phew, that was quite a letter. Yes, she accepted blame, but also revived a bunch of memories I had thought I had left far behind. A life that used to be a long, long time ago. It was evident that Bev had no expectations of me one way or the other. I wasn't sure how to, or even if I should, answer it. Jessica came in to see me later that day after I'd read the letter. She didn't mention it. James was up and walking. Since his surgery was a lot more intensive than mine, I quickly passed his level of convalescence. He would be in the hospital for at least another 3 weeks, maybe a week or week and a half. If Bev was staying until James was out of the hospital, my home could become a very interesting place to live. Or not. I began to explore alternatives. I didn't think I was ready, or even wanted, to face the situation awaiting me back at the campground. Salvation of a sort came from my partners. If I wanted, I could bunk at their place until Bev and Jessica were gone. They had a granny suite down in the basement that was mine to use as long as I wanted. This immediately solved 2 problems: where Bev would stay once I returned home, and the awkward situation that would have resulted if she stayed in the house. They arranged with Jessica to bring some of my clothes over. I wouldn't need much since I wouldn't be doing much of anything except walking and going to physio at the hospital. I was released from the hospital a week later. I read and reread the letter many times over the next few days. I was also remembering that voice I thought I heard, either in my sleep or when I was unconscious. From what Jessica had told me, the voice could only have been Bev since she had sat with me all night, every night while I was in ICU, and Jessica did say that Bev talked to me while she was there. Jessica was a frequent visitor, and my partners began to treat her like an older daughter, in addition to the brood they already had. James was healing and would soon be released from hospital. Then they would all return to Vancouver, and I could have my house back. Jessica sat down with me one afternoon to advise me of the proposed timeline, then said, "Dad, I know what you're going to say to this, but please hear me out. It's Mom. I'm worried about her. Now that she knows where you are, all the guilt she felt is coming back to the surface. I told you about her years in therapy, just so she could at least live with it. Dad, it's tearing her apart. She doesn't expect you to forgive her, but she doesn't want you to hate her either. Could you just talk to her before we go back home? Please." I don't and didn't hate her. It took a long time for me to get over her, to accept that she was gone. Why would I want to revisit all of that? Maybe because you still care for her in your subconscious? Years ago, you would have been right. Now, I don't think so. She's just someone from my distant past, someone I used to know. The fact that she's your mother has nothing to do with it. Neither does the fact that I'm your father. I was never your dad. Dad, we know all that. It wasn't your fault, something Mom always said. What is past can't be undone, but maybe you could at least see if you want to start over. If nothing else, become a friend to her, to us. With you and Jamie, I plan to become part of your lives in any case, since I'm now part of Jamie, or he's part of me, or something. But I'm not all that sure that I want to, or even should, revisit the past. I've built a good life here and have accepted that I'm by myself, and that's by my choice. I haven't seen or heard one thing from anyone that makes me want to change that. Yeah, but like Heather says, you're not happy. That's right. And you know something? That's not at all bad. I'm content with my life. I don't need excitement or any of the rest of it. Happy died a long time ago, the day your mother left me without explanation. I don't expect to see happy again in my lifetime. Revisiting what used to be or could have been surely won't change that. What used to be or what could have been are meaningless, and there's nothing I can think of that would change my thinking on it. So, you won't see her, talk to her? I thought about it for a few seconds, then said, "Tell you what, for you and James, I'll meet with her for a few minutes. Don't read anything into it. I'm doing it for you too. After that, once I'm mobile, I'll just get on with my life here." She profusely thanked me and literally skipped out of the basement suite into her rental car. She'd bring Bev over the next day before my scheduled trip to physiotherapy. The next afternoon, just after I'd finished lunch, they drove up. The door was open since it was a nice day. I just waved them in when Jessica knocked on the doorframe. Bev looked almost the same as when I'd last really seen her so many years ago. I felt a little tug at my heart upon seeing her, but it soon went away. "Hello, Jack," she greeted me. "Thank you for agreeing to see me. It means a lot. You're looking good, a bit older, but the same as I remember." "Hello, Bev. Come in and sit down." Jessica made like she was going to leave, so I added, "You too, Jessica. I want you here for this since you did all the arranging." "But Dad, stay." "You don't have to talk, but you stay." She sat down like an obedient puppy. Bev sat beside her on the sofa, and I took the recliner. "So, what did you want to see me for, Bev? To make sure I don't hate you? Hoping something will happen between us?" My voice was flat, not angry or upset or anything, just flat. "Jack, I just wanted to thank you for what you did for James. And yes, I'm hoping you don't hate me. I don't expect anything, honestly, but I'm hoping you no longer hate me. Bev, I never did hate you. It took me years to get over the hurt and betrayal I felt, and I have no desire to revisit all that. What I did for James, well, it was the right thing to do. I plan on being part of Jessica and James's lives from now on, but between us I don't want or expect anything. We'll be acquaintances, but that's all. I've had a good life here. I'm content and don't need any more than I've got. I'm glad, Jack. Really. What I did, well, you know how I feel. I wrote that letter from my heart. You would be justified in hating me, but I've hoped beyond hope that you don't ever since I found out that Jessica and James had found you. You say you don't and never did hate me. I really have no right to ask for more, and I won't. As for the kids, we welcome you to be part of their lives. You deserve that at least. You're welcome to visit anytime you want. That won't happen, Bev. I won't ever set foot in Vancouver or the lower mainland again. I told Jessica and James that, and I meant it. If Jessica and James want me to visit, either they come here or it's somewhere neutral. But it won't be in the Vancouver area. And that is not negotiable. I understand, Jack. I think I might feel the same way. But one last thing before we go. You should get hold of Pat, the woman that used to be your PA. She'd love to hear from you. She doesn't know you've been found, but I suspect either Jessica or James, or both, will be telling her. They got up from the sofa and headed toward the door. Jessica came over and gave me a hug, tears running down her face. Dad, thanks for everything. We fly out in 2 days, then you can have your house back. If James is up for it, I'll bring him over tomorrow. She walked out the door, followed by Bev, who turned as if to say something. Goodbye, Bev, I said, and closed the door quietly behind them.